Redditors, what are your most interesting roommate stories? I'm pretty sure I used to live with a hobbit. /man about 5 feet 1 inch, curly brown hair, constantly cheerful demeanor. / never wore shoes, inside or out. / literally slept on the floor in what can only be explained as a nest of blankets. / started a garden and encouraged me to eat his tomatoes all the time. / would bring home samosas and other goodies, always giving me half just because. / he and his wife had a dream of living off the grid in a tiny home on a truck. And #X200B. I hope he's doing well. We met when we showed up for dorm room assignments our freshman year of college. Almost 50 years later, we're still the closest of friends. I recently attended his daughter's wedding. A grand affair, because he happens to be uber wealthy. At one point I found myself choking up, and it wasn't for the bride and groom, it was for John and me. How far we've come from that first awkward handshake a half-century ago. My roommate once created a whole new life form by leaving beans in the fridge until they molded so bad they became pure white. Then she got mad when I threw it away because she was going to use it later. My roommate in college claimed he was involved with the mafia. He was constantly sweaty, was very jumpy, and always had a lot of cash in his car. He never was around on the weekends, and I never saw him drink. Strangest of all, is that he never once slept in his room. He was always on the couch by the door. He eventually told me that it was because if someone ever broke in looking for him, he wanted them to find him right away, so no one else would get hurt. I still don't know if he was telling the truth, but nonetheless I always locked my bedroom door at night. There are plenty, but one of my roommates used to sleepwalk and sleep talk almost every night, and I was the only one who'd be awake whenever it would happen. I'd witness her cleaning our fridge, sealing our open bag of chips, and I'd hear her quote Shakespeare in her sleep. What made her go back to bed was me asking her to sleep, and she'd look at me and close her eyes. Whenever I asked her if she recalled any of it, the answer was always no. When he skipped out on rent, and moved while I was at work, he left behind some of the most interesting porn I've seen. He was into amputees and urine. He also vomited on the carpet, never cleaned it up, and it ate through. I didn't get my deposit back. My freshman year college roommate was a random pairing. This kid partied all night and slept all day, legit wouldn't wake up until 5 p.m. He goes MIA for like a week. I call my mom because I'm not sure he's even alive. She searches to see if he has been arrested. Before she can call me back, the cops are knocking at our door and ask, "Have you seen _" and I say no. Mom calls me back a few minutes later. He had been booked for robbery at a convenience store which was in our dorm building. He tried to hide in an air vent. He made the front page of the campus newspaper, was expelled, and I got the whole dorm to myself for the rest of the fall and spring semester. My South Korean roommate in college played StarCraft 2? Not sure, well into the night. We're talking like I'd be getting up to go to class and he'd be logging off. It cured my insomnia. Listening to a game in a language I didn't understand was very soothing, apparently, and I went from taking 3 to 4 hours a night to fall asleep, if I would at all, to falling asleep within 30 seconds of laying my head down. I spent over a year falling asleep to the angry, muffled, whisper but not really arguments between my roomie and his girlfriend. Just muffled enough that I couldn't understand what the problem was, but they were clearly not happy together. So I'd just lie in bed wondering, what's my duty of care here? Like they weren't violent with each other, and it wasn't like one person was terrorizing the other, it was just two young people in a consensual and mutual spiral of despair. First college roommate rarely did laundry and would borrow my underwear, especially for dates, and return them dirty, unwashed. I told him in unequivocal terms to keep his hands off my junk, but he'd borrow whatever he needed anyway. I used to live with 2 strippers. Needless to say, they weren't early risers. One Sunday morning, we get a knock at the front door. Jehovah's Witnesses. So, Kay goes to the door, and invites them in for coffee, while buck naked. Kay is pretty, impressive naked, built like China in her prime, lots of tattoos and piercings. Needless to say, they left, quickly, and we never had missionaries at our door again. Came home from my first day of classes to poop everywhere. Toilet seat, tile, bath mat, toilet paper holder, sink, carpet. Had a long discussion. Not acceptable. Happened again, took 6 weeks to get her out. I taught a roommate how to boil water. Iced tea was the first thing, other than sandwiches and salads, that she had ever made. I had a college roommate who was obsessed with CSI. She had a CSI pillow and sheet/blankets. She refused to turn on any lights and kept all blinds shut. She hated light and would sigh loudly if I would turn the lights on to do anything. I went to college right around when you needed a college email to make a Facebook, and she would tell me that Facebook is how they spy on you. She said she would never have a MySpace or anything of the like. She might have been right on that one, and she would always say I was a sheep and that I would have my identity stolen by them. My other roommate, we were 4 with 2 bedrooms and a common area, was extremely loud at all hours, and if you ever asked her to keep it down, even very politely, she would purposely start doing cartwheels and banging on things and singing. She claimed to be Jay Leno's niece. One more, I had a roommate that slept with a new guy every weekend and we could hear her loudly through the wall. We would tell her we heard her and she vehemently denied every time that she slept with anyone. Come on, girl. I had a roommate for several years who was a decent guy, quiet, cleaned up after himself, respectful. The poor guy's life was terrible. He dropped out of high school at age 17. Then he started selling weed, which he was arrested for by an undercover cop. Being uneducated, he ended up with a felony on his record, permanently. Throw on top of that, having a child and things not working out with his baby mama, so he owed child support. This guy was working as a dishwasher at restaurants for $10 an hour, probably less. This was from 2010 to 2015 when we were roommates. He had no car, and the closest bus route to where we lived was a mile walk, uphill, from our apartment. He did this every day. One day I was talking to my dad, who loves to ride bicycles and has many, if one could be offered to my friend. He put some new pedals on a road bike of his, that's all he had, and I gave it to my friend. On the third day after he had been given the bike, I was awoken randomly to knocks on my bedroom door and some mumbled speech. I opened my door and there's my roommate, with his hand up to his face, covered in blood and maybe a tooth in there. He had placed his bag of clothes on the handlebar, and the drag from the front tire pulled the bag in and caused him to faceplant on concrete. I remember taking him to the hospital, and he asked me to look at his mouth. Good God, this has a happy ending, or something like it. After this injury, he had enough with walking to the bus, so he got a second job, and began saving up to buy a car. For the first few weeks though, this guy was walking to the bus, and then working a 16+ hour day. There was a gap between jobs, where he couldn't rest much, so was probably getting 4 hours of sleep a night. He was saving funds and due to his child support, he could only eat banquet $1 frozen dinners, all day. That's all he had was one of those. He eventually got the car and his quality of life got marginally better before he parted ways. He ended up moving in with family and closer to bus lines. Maybe not the most extraordinarily interesting story ever, but nonetheless, what that guy went through, I can't imagine. He used to tell me when he was walking home at night, he often contemplated stepping into oncoming traffic. Thankfully he never did. After we both left the apartment and went our separate ways, we kept in touch. However, he frequently had phone issues when we lived together, and had several different #s in 5 years. I reached out to him to check in 5 years ago and never heard back. I hope he's okay. Edit, thanks for the silver. She was majorly depressed. She worked a lot and for very little money, so she would mostly come home and lock herself in her room. At some point, she stopped cleaning or doing laundry. She worked at a childcare center, and at some point contracted impetigo. Gross, but treatable. She wouldn't get it treated, however, because it was too expensive. So I lived in fear I would contract it, let alone the other kids she was watching. She told her work it was being treated and was no longer contagious. They just believed her. She had these massive, crusty patches all over her face and just didn't care. After 5 whole weeks, she finally went to the doctor. Things were tense until her mom came to visit a few weeks later and convinced her to be committed. She had been sending suicidal messages to her mom every day for weeks. Her mom paid her rent for the next 3 months until the lease was up, and she moved back home. Never spoke again. Hope she is doing better. I went to UC Santa Cruz, and when I was a junior, my housemate and I had a situation with our third housemate that left us in a bind where we needed to find a new third quickly before the first of the month when rent was due. We went on Craigslist and ended up with this guy. He said he was a hairdresser, and he actually was. Unfortunately, that wasn't his only gig. We all lived together for 4 months. Things started going south pretty quickly and he kept having trouble coming up with the money to pay rent. Finally, things in the house got so bad that I told our landlord that I thought my housemate and I were in danger and could he please let us out of our rental agreement early. He took pity on us and agreed. That last month Stu never gave me his share of rent or utilities, but he kept telling me he would get the money soon. The last time I talked to him, he said he was going to get the money that night. You can guess by the article what happened that night. I never heard from him again. Bastard still owes me money. Freshman year of college, I was randomly assigned a roommate to share a tiny room, 11x15, I think. I was a quiet comp-sci student from the San Francisco area who liked video games and D&D. My assigned roommate was a huge mechanical engineering major from the South who liked his lifted truck, dipped tobacco, and getting drunk as often as possible. Needless to say, the next 6 months were not fun. He left his spit cups everywhere, constantly played loud country music, and messed around with my stuff, including scratching a nasty slur into my Office Space-esque stapler. As the year went on he seemed to get worse, probably due to finding a group of like-minded people in the dorms. Long story short, he was kicked out of the dorms about 2 weeks before the spring break. He and another guy went on a rampage through the dorm with airsoft guns shooting the little whiteboard on everyone's door. For some reason, though, he was allowed to stay until the break. I stupidly left for home before he did, and when I got back my very nice gaming PC was missing. I reported it missing, and told the police exactly where I thought it was, at his new place. They apparently searched it, and though they didn't find my computer, they found enough other stolen goods to get him expelled from school. Thankfully, my replacement roommate was a very nice, quiet guy, and the rest of the year went well. I had a roommate who threatened to take everything I owned out of my room and put it on the sidewalk because I was keeping my bike in our living room after she had declared a not agreed upon rule that there couldn't be any personal items in our common space. 2 weeks after I reluctantly agreed to store my bike in my tiny bedroom, she ordered this table for our entryway. This is my only roommate story. After this, I swore never again. A childhood friend and her boyfriend. He was a chef, line cook at a chain restaurant, who would cook mediocre meals when the urge took him, which took damn near every pot and pan in the kitchen to make, and fucked off without cleaning up after himself. He also had a kitten really, who he never bought food for, so I had to feed it because I'm not a monster. She was an unemployed student, like me, who would use the cups from my dinner set as ashtrays, and load up a single plate of food, take it to her room, eat from it throughout the day, and keep it. Rinse, repeat every day until we were out of plates. I said I'd clean them if she just brought them back to the kitchen, but nah, I'd have to wait until she was out then go get them, complete with moldering food remnants. Eventually, my boyfriend joined our happy little household, and I started setting boundaries because it was no longer 2-to-1. That led to a blow-up screaming match, and me and him moving out. My only regret is that I didn't take the cat. I own a house and rent out rooms in it. Right after I first got it I was pretty strapped for cash and needed to rent out both of the rooms as quickly as possible. And unfortunately it didn't align with the usual lease start dates in town, university and college, so January, May and September are the usual. I had a lady come, mid-30s, wanted the furnished room. I felt it was a little off. Why does this grown woman have no furniture? My friends basically scolded me for being judgmental. Maybe she just got out of a bad relationship, maybe she is new to the city, etc., so I rented to her. Turns out she had just gotten out of jail for dealing meth. And honestly, she was better than the other one. She did her meth business in hotel rooms. She paid cash on time. She wasn't home a lot. One time she left her little meth scale in the living room, and it inspired me to get a food scale, which was a game changer in my weight loss journey. A serving of spaghetti is pathetically small and I had no idea until I weighed it. Ended up making up a lie to get her to leave when she brought a strung out friend home in the middle of the night because that's a little much for me. Meanwhile the other looked good on paper. She was an early childhood educator on the supply list. Except she was an alcoholic and heavy weed smoker. She never went to work because she never woke up in time. She never paid rent on time. She brought home a random group from the bar in the middle of the night on a Wednesday. She would take 3-hour-long baths in my only bathroom, and was just not my type of roommate. Finally kicked her out when she started stealing booze from me. I caught her, warned her. She did it again a few days later. I called her out on it again, gave her a month's notice to move out, and she had the nerve to ask for the rest of the booze. So comparatively, the meth one was better. I lived in a house with 2 other guys. Let's call them Steve and Jake. At the time, we were all working pretty well paid jobs, so we decided to hire a cleaner to come and spruce up our man den twice a week. I don't remember how, but we ended up with an absolutely drop-dead gorgeous young Polish girl who spoke no English whatsoever. We had to get our Polish neighbor to tell her what our expectations were, etc. For the first month or 2, everything was going great and we were happy with her. She'd usually come in when we were all out working so we'd never see her, but she'd leave the place looking immaculate. Then, out of the blue, her work quality went to absolute shit and it became apparent that she was either not doing anything or she wasn't even going to the house anymore. One night, after a few weeks of her shitty work, I'm talking to Steve and Jake and I suggested we fire her. Jake was all for it, but Steve, for some reason, was dead against it. Instead, he suggested we have our neighbor give her a warning. I just kind of said whatever and let him take care of it. Fast forward another month, I'm at work and I suddenly get sick, so I go home early. I walk in the door and lo and behold I see Steve, ass naked on the sofa, hands and feet tied up, and wearing a ball gag, with the cleaner riding him whilst wearing an extremely revealing maid's outfit. The look on both their faces when I walked in was fucking hilarious. And even though I was sick I died laughing knowing why her work quality sucked so bad. It turned out he used to come home every lunchtime when she was there, bang her senseless, then drop her off at her next job. Long story short, he got her pregnant, and she still lives with him to this day with their little girl. My college roommate didn't know how to do laundry before we started school. We had a community washer and dryer on our floor. Probably the 3rd week of school, I went down to get a soda from the machine and I walk in and there are bubbles 4 inches deep on the floor. My roommate walks in behind me to check his laundry. He had put 3 full scoops of Tide in the washer with his load. I had to take him to an off-campus laundromat to wash all of the excess soap out of his clothes. I had a very religious roommate once named Mike, who thought I was religious too, I guess, and he would often exclaim things like, "OMG Kitnooklin, there's so many people outside. We should be evangelizing." He would never read any books except the Bible, literally, and he would often pray right in the middle of the common space on his hands and knees. Weird guy, but he always paid his rent on time, kept his dishes clean, and it's hard to find roommates. Anyway, one day while I was reading a book in the living room, Mike came out looking very concerned and asked to talk. "I think there's a demon living in this house," he said. "I'm the kind of person who likes to yes/in people, especially when they say something a little crazy. So I asked him to tell me more." "Well," he started, "last night I had a dream, no, not a dream, a nightmare. A snake was choking me, and I was fighting with it." He exaggerated hand movements a little aggressively to demonstrate his wrestling. "Finally I threw it off of me, but then I realized I was awake, so I sat up and looked over at your side of the bed, and that's when I saw it." "Saw what?" I asked, more excited by the second. "The demon. The dark cloud man was just standing next to your bed, watching you sleep. He was like a cloudy shadow with white eyes. I think it's possessing the house." Amazed by what he was saying, I asked what we should do about it. "Have an exorcism." I almost spit out my drink. "Well, I've never done that before." "I have," he interrupted. So I was like, "Well, if you say so." Anyway, basically he had blessed holy water from the tap, and was walking around the room tossing it here and there yelling, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to leave, demon." Meanwhile, I'm trying not to laugh for the whole 30 minutes until he finishes. He's literally sweating in prayer, and finally stands up to say it is done, and walks to his room. We never talked about it ever again. If I had the screenwriting skills, I was, at one point, ready to write a pilot about a former roommate of mine. Things he decided as a 38-year-old man after getting fired from his job for repeated sexual harassment. He would join the NFL and be the next Jerry Rice. He would become a rock star like Motley Crue and dyed his hair blonde. He would become the next martial arts cinema star like Bruce Lee. He was going to be the next Arnold Schwarzenegger and began drinking protein shakes. In his defense, he was physically ripped, but he was half Taiwanese, half Chinese and was 5 feet 7 inches 110 pounds. He got up to 140 during his Arnold phase, then while trying to get his yellow belt at a local TKD studio, he told the instructor that he needs personal attention because of who he is going to be, and the master should give him private lessons for free. After the guy laughed in his face, he tried to pick a fight with him. When he decided to become a rock star, he decided he wanted to be a guitarist because they get chicks, but guitars are expensive, so he bought 2 drumsticks instead. I couldn't make up this shit if I tried. Dude was absolutely not connected to reality and would get downright indignant if you tried to tell him his dream was not possible. Mix this personality in with attractive women and you have a recipe for disastrous sexual harassment claims. In the time I knew him, he was fired from 3 different jobs for sexual harassment, and that was only about 2 years. For reference, his father was in prison for raping his 12-year-old stepdaughter at gunpoint. A few years back, my former roommate and I let our downstairs neighbor move in with us because the guy he was living with had taken up a new habit. He'd befriended the pigeons that hung out on the rooftop outside his bedroom window and eventually started taking them inside and caring for them like pets. Shit got real dirty real quick. He started watching me from dark corners of the house at night if I was in the common areas. Super fucking creepy. Edit, I love how a creepy ass experience turned into something so cute, ha 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 ha. Thanks Reddit. Lived in a dorm with this Mormon guy who just came home from being a missionary. He was the most sexually repressed person I'd ever seen. This dude had never heard of masturbating. He'd stay up until like 2 in the morning looking at girls' Facebook photos and muttering, "Oh man, she's so hot." He was super creepy around women. He'd sit next to them and try and put his arm over their shoulders. He had real creepy, rapey vibes, and he also had some kind of fungus that stunk up the apartment, so I got the fuck out the next semester. I used to cook dinner and always made enough to offer to our roommate. He paid his bills and rent always, but sometimes he didn't have enough for food, so I would cook and say, "Hey man, wanna have dinner with us?" He would usually say he didn't like whatever I was making. Fast forward to morning, all the leftovers were gone. His explanation? He must have been sleepwalking and ate it in his sleep. This happened 15 to 20 times over a year period, minimum. He would make these big song and dances about how what I was making was gross, so I would put up enough leftovers for 2, my boyfriend and I, then go to bed. What was to be lunches for work gone and often dirty utensils in the sink. Fast forward another 5 years and he called me at 3 a.m. after not talking to me or my partner for 3 years, and told me my now husband, aforementioned BF, was doing crack in front of our 4-year-old. I called my husband, who was asleep. Neither of us had talked to him in years. What was this? Fast forward another 5 years. He's on death row for killing his roommate. His defense? He did it sleepwalking. I have a few stories. The first involves this guy I'll call Sean. Sean owned a small house in rural NC outside of a larger city. I was looking for a place and Sean offered me his tiny camper trailer on his property as he already had people renting out the other rooms in his house but still wanted to help me out. I was having a time in my personal life, so I moved into the trailer and paid like $200 per month for the trailer and access to the house. The other roommates were paying I think $300 per month each. Well, one thing led to another and I started dating one of the roommates. Let's call him Ben. So Ben and I are hanging out. It seems all good. I'm spending more nights than not in Ben's room. Sean had even encouraged Ben and me to date, so I thought he was happy for us. One day Sean came home in a blind rage and kicked me out of the house. I was sitting in the living room watching TV with the other roommates. He locked me out of the house and disconnected the electricity from the house to the tiny trailer. In January, I asked him to talk to me about what was going on and he point blank refused to acknowledge my existence but didn't seem to have much of a problem with Ben. Finally, after 3 days he told me what he was pissed about. 1. Cooking myself dinner and not offering him any. 2. Not buying nice beer for him. 3. Having a relationship with Ben. I moved out as quickly as I could and cut all ties with Sean. Ben and I dated for another year after that, but are no longer together.